Okay, this is the fourth part of our 1945 tutorial, and the first thing that we need to do is correct something we didn't do in the last one. In part 3, we added the ability of the game to handle lives so that when the player crashed into an enemy plane, the game didn't end immediately. It was supposed to have 3 lives, and each crash ended up taking away 1 life, but the game should have continued. We didn't change a couple of things. I didn't change a couple of things. And so the way that we left it, the game only allows you to have 1 life and then it restarts. So let's go and fix that right now. We're going to go to explosion number 2. And the way this is set up, when the player collides with an enemy plane and it runs out of health, then what we did was we turned the player's plane into an explosion 2. And then we destroy the explosion, we sleep, pause for a few seconds, and right here's the problem. We show the high score and restart the game. Let's delete those. And instead, let's do this. Let's create a new plane, an object myPlane, at 0, 0 relative to the explosion. And then let's go ahead and set the lives to -1 relative. Now, when we run out of lives, we already set up the object controller life to handle no more lives equals show the high score and restart the game. So that system should be in place. So if we run out of health, we play the sound explosion 2, and we change the plane into an explosion 2, in which case these events will happen, and that's what we just changed. So that would take care of it. All right, here's what we're going to add in part 4. We're going to add several different types of enemies. The first type of enemy that we're going to add is a plane that flies down the screen and fires bullets straight ahead. The second type of enemy we'll create is another plane that flies down the screen, and it fires a bullet that actually is aimed towards the player's location. It's not like a heat-seeking missile or anything. It doesn't follow the player around, but wherever the player is when the bullet is fired, that's the path the bullet will take. So it'll be a straight line towards the player's current position. And then finally, we'll add a fourth enemy that will fly up from the bottom of the screen. This one won't fire any bullets, but it's tricky because you can't really see it coming because it comes from behind, and it's tough to avoid and then get behind it so you can shoot it. So that'll be the last type of plane that we will create. All right, starting off, let's create the sprite for our second enemy plane. And enemy 2 is this plane here. It looks just like the first one, but it's yellow instead of green. And we'll name this SPR_ enemy 2. Let's reset the origin like we did on the rest of them. So it's 16 and 16. And then click OK. Okay, now enemy 2 is going to behave very similarly to enemy 1. So instead of creating a whole new object from scratch, we're going to take enemy 1 and right-click on it and choose duplicate. And this one will change to enemy 2, obj_ enemy 2. We'll change the sprite to the enemy 2 sprite. And okay, what things do we need to change? Well, in the collision with a bullet, we're going to give you more points for getting this guy. So let's double click this, and let's make this one worth 10 points. Now, to make this enemy fire its own bullets, we need to create a bullet object. So let's first of all create a sprite for our new bullet. Let's see, let's go to load sprite. And we have our bullet, that's the bullet for the player. And then we have enemy bullet 1 and enemy bullet 2. We'll use enemy bullet 1 for this one. SPR_ enemy bullet _ we'll delete the underscore, we'll do 1. Enemy bullet 1, and then we'll click, I don't remember if this is going to cause us problems or not, but let's center everything since it's drawn in the middle. So let's make the origin the center point. 16 by 16, click OK. Next we need a bullet object, so let's create an object. obj underscore enemy underscore bullet 1. And when this object is created, we'll do a create event. We're going to set its vertical speed to 8. Remember, positive 8 will move it down the screen this way. And then in a step event, we want to check the bullet's Y value. So let's go to Control and let's check variable. We're looking for the Y variable, and we want to see if it is larger than, remember, if we're moving down the screen, we're gaining numbers in the Y value, and the bottom of the screen is the value of screen height or room height. And if that bullet gets larger than that for its Y variable, then we want to destroy it. So that means it's outside the room. So if the Y variable is larger than room underscore height plus 32, so that means it's, you know, it's well outside the room. It's gone a couple of lengths outside the room. Then we'll go ahead and destroy the instance self. Okay. Click OK. Let's go back to enemy 2. And in enemy 2, we're going to go to the step event. And right now, the only thing that's in there is this is controlling whether or not the enemy plane has gone out of the room. So if the enemy plane goes out of the room, it's going to jump back up to the top of the screen to a new position randomly and start coming down again. Another thing we want to do in the step event is what's called a throw dice action. And that's under control. And it looks like dice, and it means test chance. So we'll drag this out. And it asks you how many sides you want to use. We're going to put in 30. What we're essentially saying is whatever we put after this is going to have a 1 in 30 chance of happening every step. How many steps are there in a second? There's 30. So essentially this is going to happen. There's a chance that this will happen once a second. It'll happen on average about 1 time every second. Sometimes it might be 1.5 seconds. Sometimes it might happen twice within 1 second. But on average, it's going to be about once a second that this will happen. Click OK. With a chance of 1 out of 30 every step, we're going to create enemy bullet 1 at a place, a location of 0, 0 relative to the enemy plane. All right, once a second, it'll shoot a bullet. It's random, so it's, you know, about once a second, and that makes a much more challenging enemy. Okay, now we need to go to our controller enemy and add in the possibility of this new enemy coming onto the scene. So let's open this up. Right now we just have alarm 0. Let's also create alarm 1. So right here in the main 2 tab, we'll drag another alarm out, and this one will be alarm 1. And we'll set the number of steps on this one to 1,000. And then we need to add an event for alarm 1. So what happens when alarm 1 goes off? When alarm 1 goes off, we want to create enemy plane 2. And we'll create enemy 2 random room width for X and -16 for Y. So it appears above the room at a different place each time and comes straight down. Click OK. And then we want to reset the alarm to, we'll set it this time to 500. And that is alarm 1. Okay, so controller enemy is going to be in the room, and when the room starts, when the game starts, we will create 2 alarms. Alarm 0 will control enemy 1 planes, and alarm 1 will control enemy 2 planes. And each of these is set to create one and then wait a little bit and create another one more frequently. Notice that this one's going to happen first because it's only counting down from 200. That means at the beginning of the game, you're only going to see enemy 1s. This one starts at 1,000, so 800 steps after this one goes, then we'll see this one. So you'll see enemy 1 planes for a little bit, and then you'll start to see a mix of enemy 1 plus enemy 2. And then, coming up next, we're going to create enemy 3. So, all right, click OK on that one. And now we need to create a sprite for enemy 3. New sprite, SPR underscore enemy 3, and we'll load sprite. Grab the enemy 3 sprite. And again, let's center the graphics here so that the origin is in the middle of the plane. Click OK. We also need a different bullet for this one, so we're going to create a sprite for enemy bullet 2. SPR underscore enemy underscore bullet 2. And once again, let's center the origin. Click OK. For enemy 3, it's going to work a lot like enemy 2, so we're going to just duplicate that guy and then make some modifications. So right click on enemy 2, choose duplicate, and then let's fix this guy so he's different. OBJ underscore enemy 3, and then we'll select the enemy 3 sprite. Okay. First of all, let's go into the collision with a bullet. This is the bullet that the player fires, and we'll change the score since this one's a little more challenging. Let's set the score on this one to 20 points and click OK. And then for the next thing we have to do, we actually have to create the second enemy bullet as an object. So let's get out of here for a second. And we already imported the sprite for enemy bullet 2, but we don't have an object yet. New object, obj underscore enemy underscore bullet 2, and we'll choose the enemy 2 bullet sprite. And that's all we'll do for now. Just click OK. We just needed it to be in the list so we can work on it in enemy 3. So back to object enemy 3. Now we're going to go to the step event, and instead of the dice being 1 chance in 30, let's double click that. Let's change this to 1 chance in 80, which means every 2 or 3 seconds. It's going to be like 2.6 seconds on average. So sometimes it might take 3 seconds, sometimes it might be 2 or less. But that's about how often this plane will fire a bullet. Remember, this bullet is the one that's going to get fired towards the player. It's not going to come straight down the screen. If the player's there, it's going to fire straight towards the player. So this will be a hard one to avoid. Click OK. And then we're going to create an instance of enemy bullet 2 instead of enemy bullet 1. So enemy bullet 2 at 0, 0 relative to the player. I'm sorry, relative to enemy 3. Okay, that is all we need to change at this point. So let's click OK. Now we need to do some programming for enemy bullet 2. This bullet needs to be told that as soon as it's created, it needs to find out if there's a player, a big plane, and then it needs to fly towards that location. And then we'll describe what happens when they collide. So let's get into this. First of all, in the create event, we want to move towards a position, and that's this icon right here, move towards. Now, how do we find out the X and Y coordinates of the player? Remember that every object in the game has an X and a Y coordinate, and those are local variables. They're attached to the specific plane object. If I just check X and Y, 0, 0 relative or something like that, I'm going to be checking the X and Y for the enemy bullet. I'll be checking for itself. But that's not what we want to do. But what we can move towards is obj underscore myplane.x. Okay? So that is the x value for the myplane object, not the x value for, for itself. That's how you can access variables that are local to a different object. You have to name the object first and then say dot and then whatever variable you're trying to access. Okay? So then we'll do object underscore myplane.y and we'll set the speed to 8. Click OK. Now, there's a potential problem with this. This action, if it turns out that there's no player or there's no target available, if the player's plane isn't there, it causes an error, or it can cause an error. So, what happens if the player gets destroyed just as this bullet is being fired? The game's going to stop and there'll be an error message, and we need to figure out a way around that. So what we can do is we can check to see if the player exists before we do this. So let's go to our control tab, and here we have the check instance, test instant count. Let's drag that out above this one, and the object we're going to test for is the player's plane, object myplane. And we're going to see if the number is equal to 1. And click OK. So if the player's plane is there, if the number of myplane instances is equal to 1, then move towards that point. Incidentally, if you use this move towards a point thing and there's more than one object, the bullet will move towards the first object of those types that exist. So you can use this with more than one object on the screen. All right, now what we need to do next is create a step event, and we're going to test to see if the bullet is outside the player's outside the screen. Now, normally what we do is we test the bullet's Y variable to see if it's gone past the bottom of the screen. Well, the problem with this one is this bullet could be flying in any direction. It's going to fire at the player wherever the player is when it gets fired. So it could be moving at an angle, it could be moving up the screen or sideways. So that would be a lot of programming to figure out which, to make sure it hadn't moved out of any specific direction, top, bottom, left, or right. Fortunately, there's an easy event we can use to avoid that problem. Add event, other, outside room. So this is just a general test to see if the object is outside of the room. If the object ever goes outside the room, this event gets triggered, and in that case we can destroy self. Okay, that is all for this guy. Okay, to make enemy 3 show up, we'll need to add another alarm to the object controller enemy, so open that up. And we have alarm 0 controlling the first enemy plane. We have alarm 1 controlling the second enemy plane's appearance. So let's create a new alarm, and this will be alarm 2. And the number of steps on this one, let's see, our last one was 1,000. So let's make this one 1,300. And okay, click OK. Now what happens when alarm 2 goes off? Alarm 2. We're going to create an instance of enemy 3. And we'll do, for X, we'll do random room underscore width. And for Y, we'll do -16. So the same as all the other ones. It'll appear somewhere along the top edge above the screen, and it'll fly down into view. Click OK. After that, we need to reset alarm 2. And let's reset it to, let's reset it to 600. Alarm 2. Click OK. Well, you know what? The rest of them are going 500. Let's just, let's keep it consistent. 500. So essentially what that means is, you know, these are staggered. At the beginning of the game, there's only enemy 1s. A little bit later, there's enemy 1s and enemy 2s showing up. And then later on, there's enemy 1s, 2s, and 3s all showing up at the same time. And so the initial appearance is delayed. This one is 200 steps. This one is 1,000 steps. This is 1,300 steps. So that's just the initial appearance. But from that point forward, they appear every 500 steps. So then they're pretty regular with how often they show up. All right, let me test this game out and make sure that that's working okay. Okay, here's my enemy 1s showing up. And it may take a while for the enemy 2s to show up, so I'll probably fast forward this on the tutorial. Oh, there's an enemy 2. I saw one. There's a yellow one right there. There's another one. See if I can get one in the middle to shoot. Whoa, he's shooting fast. Okay, this game is definitely more challenging than it was. And let's see if the lives are working. Yep, lives are working fine. Okay, I'm noticing a couple problems here. First of all, the enemy bullets are not harming the player, and also they're flying through the player and continuing on their way. Also, it looks like enemy 2 is firing too rapidly, so let's jump in and take a look at those things there. Enemy 2 in a step event, 1 out of 30 bullet. Well, I guess it's got a 1 in 30 chance. I guess it could happen a couple of times a second, so that's fine. We'll leave that there. But the enemy bullets, we need to go and check that out. So enemy bullet 1, we don't have a collision event with the player. So add event, collision, my plane. When that happens, we're going to destroy self, which is the bullet, and then we're going to set the player's health to negative 30 relative. Maybe less. Maybe we'll do negative 10 since you know, crashing into another plane would be more damage than just a bullet. So negative 10 on the bullets. And that should do it. Let's click OK. And we'll do the same thing for bullet number 2. Create event collision my plane. And we'll destroy the instance self. And then we'll set the player's health to negative 10 relative. Okay. That should take care of that. Now, enemy 4 is tricky. Let's go ahead and I'll add in the sprite here. Oops. SPR underscore enemy 4. And we'll load the sprite, and the sprite is this one here. Notice the plane's facing a different direction. Okay, this plane's going to be flying up from the bottom of the screen, and it's not going to fire any bullets, it's just going to be moving up the screen, so it's another thing to avoid, and it'll be definitely a challenge for the player. Okay, so on this part of it, I'm actually going to leave this as a challenge to you guys. I'll give you the following hints. This enemy is most similar to object enemy 1 because it doesn't fire any bullets. So you want to start maybe there and see how enemy 1 was created, and then try to mimic that object. Only instead of flying down the screen, it's flying up the screen. Another thing you should be aware of is that this enemy should be worth more points because it's more difficult in the sense that it comes from a different direction and it's hard to kind of shoot it. You don't have as much time to see it there. Let's make it 40 points. The other thing that you need to know about this one is that the object controller enemy should trigger this enemy last in the list of enemies. So the way the game is built right now, it starts out with enemy 1s, and then it gets more difficult because enemy 2s start showing up, and then enemy 3s start showing up, and finally enemy 4s should start showing up. So that should be later in the game, and you've kind of seen how those alarms are staggered and set up. But you need to make it so that enemy 4 shows up towards the end of the game and after all the other 3 enemy types have appeared. So by the time this enemy 4 shows up, you're going to be seeing all of the enemies at once on the screen. You'll see enemy 1s, enemy 2s, and enemy 3s, and then all of a sudden here comes enemy 4s flying in from the bottom of the screen. So I'll leave that up to you. There will be a second tutorial that will show you the solution if you just absolutely get stuck, but I'm not going to give that to you today. That'll be out tomorrow.